She is moving slower than the children this morning, and everyone has noticed. The societies that abandoned elders during famine were, during abundance, the same societies most devoted to integrating them into daily productive life. So why did they leave her? And what does that tell us about how much she was worth? You're probably thinking this was indifference. The research points somewhere else entirely. Beginning in the 1980s, Professor Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah conducted systematic fieldwork among foraging communities in Tanzania, documenting food acquisition patterns across different ages and sexes. The findings were published in Current Anthropology in 1997 with co-authors O'Connell and Blurton Jones. The core finding: elderly post-menopausal women were among the most productive food providers in the group. Hawkes documented a precise pattern. Children's growth tracked their mother's foraging output until the mother had a new infant. Then growth shifted to track the grandmother's output instead. The grandmother was not a dependent. She was a caloric production unit that freed younger women to have children at shorter intervals, directly increasing group birth rates. In human terms, the abandonment decision, when it came, was made by people who had experienced their elders as contributors for decades. It was the exception to a long default of value, not the expression of how the group felt about old age. The math had been running in her favor for 30 years. This morning, it changed. The digging stick wasn't a tool. It was a knowledge interface, a simple fire-hardened shaft whose effectiveness depended entirely on the person holding it. Extracting underground tubers requires reading soil surface disruptions, plant growth patterns, and seasonal moisture cues that vary by microclimate and reveal themselves only through decades of direct observation in a specific landscape. The counterintuitive detail: older women in Hawkes's documentation produced more food per hour than younger women, not less. Knowledge had outpaced physical decline, turning the elder into a net positive contributor at ages modern institutions classify as dependent. The elder's memory wasn't personal history. It was the group's only archive, remote episodic memory. The neurological capacity to retain specific past events in high detail is selectively preserved in older adults even as working memory declines. An elder who had survived 3 droughts held location-specific, scenario-specific information about the 4th that no younger group member could possess. This wasn't just experience. It was irreplaceable predictive data stored in a single human brain. The departure protocol, documented by anthropologists in Arctic foraging communities, was not chaos. It was social architecture. A codified form with established structure, communal acknowledgement, and the departing individual's own voice at the center. The group left resources with the elder: food, warmth materials, sometimes a tool. Not because it was rational by short-term accounting, because preserving the group's identity as people who care for their members had survival consequences that extended past the crisis event. She has been walking since before the sun was up. 3 days on frozen ground, following the herd north. Her knees have been failing since last winter. She walks with a lean that nobody has named. The digging stick she carries has fed this group in bad seasons more times than anyone can count. She knows which soil surface breaks mean roots below. She knows which vegetation cluster in this specific valley indicates water that will persist through a dry month. She knows where the game concentrates when the season turns, because she watched it happen 40 years ago, and the year after that, and the year after that. Nobody else alive was there for any of those observations. This morning she moved slower than the children. The group knows what this means. So does she. She has been on the other side of this calculation twice before. Historical accounts from Arctic foraging communities, documented by ethnographers through the early 20th century, record that the departure decision was sometimes initiated by the elder themselves, framed not as abandonment but as a final act of contribution. The framing mattered. An elder who named their own departure as care preserved something the group could not afford to lose: the belief that they were people who did not leave each other. That belief had survival consequences for every subsequent crisis the group would face. Before she left, they asked her everything: which water source holds through the dry season east of the ridge, what the sky looked like before the last flood, which root surface pattern she reads in clay soil before she digs. Remote episodic memory, the specific autobiographical records from decades past. holds its precision longer than nearly any other cognitive function. She could answer accurately. She did. The resources left with her, food, fire-making materials, were not irrational. They preserved the option of return if conditions changed, and they preserved the group's account of itself. Both had value. On a long enough timeline, both paid forward. The cold presses in from the north. She does not move away from it. The first break came with agriculture, roughly 10,000 years ago. Heritable property, land, livestock, stored grain, gave elders new leverage through inheritance while displacing their primary value, irreplaceable environmental knowledge that had been indispensable, precisely because it lived nowhere but in living memory. Written records, fixed locations, and specialized institutions began absorbing knowledge that elders had previously held exclusively. The elders' knowledge remained useful, but it was no longer uniquely irreplaceable. The second break was geographic separation. The grandmother hypothesis depends on physical co-location. A grandmother foraging beside her grandchildren contributes directly to their caloric needs and frees their mother to reproduce sooner. A grandmother 2 hours away by car contributes to those same needs only indirectly. The multi-generational household gave way to the nuclear family, then to elder-specific institutions. A 2010 meta-analysis confirmed statistically significant grandmother effects on grandchild survival in pre-industrial populations, effects now structurally unavailable to most families in industrialized societies. What was lost was not elder care. Modern institutions provide care. What was lost was the structural integration of elder productivity into daily life. The arrangement under which the elder's knowledge and contribution remained continuously available to the people it was meant to serve. We moved the elder somewhere their value could not reach. You place the elderly in institutions designed to extend life. They kept the elderly at the center of daily food production. You manage cognitive decline with specialists. They extracted the knowledge before it was gone, asking the right questions while there was still time to ask them. You measure elder worth in years remaining. They measured it in droughts survived, roots found, and winters that didn't kill anyone. The group did not abandon her because they did not value her. They abandoned her because they had measured her value, precisely, for 63 years. And this was the first morning the number had come out differently. This content is intended strictly for educational and documentary purposes. All historical, anthropological, and ethnographic references are drawn from peer-reviewed research and named academic sources.